The courtroom buzzed with murmurs and tension, thick with expectation. Reporters lined the back rows, some scribbling notes, others holding their breath as cameras rolled quietly behind glass partitions. This wasn't just any trial, it was one of the most emotionally charged cases the city had seen in years. A high-profile domestic abuse case with only one living eyewitness, a 3-year-old girl named Lily. No one was sure how the day would unfold. Judges, prosecutors, and even seasoned defense attorneys had expressed concern about placing a toddler on the stand. Would she understand what was happening? Would she speak at all? The judge, an older woman with a reputation for compassion and grit, glanced down at the file in front of her. She had reviewed the case over and over, but there were too many unknowns. The child hadn't spoken since the night her mother was found unconscious in their home, bruised, bleeding, and barely breathing. The accused, the mother's boyfriend. His defense was airtight, or so it seemed. But today, something different was happening. The double doors creaked open, and all eyes turned. A small figure stepped inside, holding tightly onto her foster mother's hand. She wore a pale blue dress with white polka dots, a ribbon slipping down the side of her messy hair. Clutched in her free hand was a plush bunny, its ear half torn and dangling from overuse. Lily, behind her, patted the soft sound of claws on linoleum. Shadow. The courtroom collectively exhaled when the large German shepherd entered the room. Calm and majestic. His brown eyes scanned the room, alert but relaxed, his police-issued therapy vest strapped securely around his chest. Shadow had been trained to comfort young victims during testimony, but no one knew just how crucial his role would become. Lily paused. Her eyes flicked nervously across the unfamiliar faces, the towering seats, and the looming figure of the judge at the bench. She gripped her foster mother's fingers tighter. Then she saw him, Shadow. He sat perfectly still on the rug, just in front of the witness chair, head slightly tilted. Without prompting, Lily let go of her foster mother's hand and shuffled over to him. She crouched beside the dog and buried her face in his thick fur. A hush fell over the room. Even the tapping of the court clerk's pen stopped. The judge leaned forward. The prosecutor looked hopeful. The defense attorney raised an eyebrow. Then Lily whispered. Only Shadow could hear it. Her lips barely moved, her breath shallow, her fingers twisting a piece of the dog's fur. At first, it seemed like just a child's nervous murmur, until her face changed. She pulled back slightly and looked up at Shadow, her wide eyes focused, her brow furrowing like someone trying to remember something long buried. Then she looked across the room, at him, the man on trial. Lily didn't point. She didn't cry. But her voice, suddenly louder than anyone expected, sliced through the silence like a blade through still water. He's the bad one. Gasps erupted from the gallery. The defense attorney shot to his feet. Objection. Sustained, the judge said quickly, recovering her composure. The court will disregard the child's outburst. But no one did. Not really. The jury had seen her face. The unfiltered truth in her voice. The fear in her eyes. The simplicity and certainty in those 4 words. Lily hadn't been coached. She hadn't been told what to say. She had spoken to a dog. The prosecutor, a woman in her mid-30s named Rachel Torres, had been preparing for this moment for weeks. Still, she hadn't expected such a raw, immediate declaration. She kept her expression neutral, but her heart pounded in her chest. There was no script that could have delivered a moment like this. Lily was guided to the witness chair, where she sat sideways, her legs dangling, her hand never leaving Shadow's neck. He sat beside her loyally, as if aware of the weight on his shoulders, or perhaps on hers. Lily, Rachel began gently, kneeling beside her so she wouldn't have to look up. Do you know where you are today? Lily didn't answer. Instead, she leaned over and whispered something else into Shadow's ear. The courtroom was silent again. "He knows," she said softly, brushing her fingers along the top of the dog's head. "He saw." Rachel glanced toward the judge, who gave a subtle nod to continue. "Lily, can you tell us what Shadow saw?" The little girl looked down at her shoes, then back at the dog. "There was a bang," she said. "Mommy screamed. Shadow wasn't there yet, but now he knows." She reached into the pocket of her dress and pulled out a tiny crumpled drawing. It showed a stick figure of a girl hiding under a table and a bigger figure standing nearby, with scribbles for arms' angry, harsh lines. She handed it to Rachel. "He broke the table," she added. Rachel unfolded the paper and held it up. The courtroom watched, unsure how to react. The defense team whispered hurriedly among themselves, already planning their objections. But even they looked shaken. The judge turned to the jury. "You are instructed to weigh this testimony carefully, and remember that the witness is a minor," she said, her voice low, almost hesitant now. But she knew, as everyone in that room now knew, something real had just happened. The bond between Lily and the dog wasn't just therapeutic. It was powerful. It was unlocking something no therapist or police officer could. Shadow had become her translator, her shield, her voice, and her truth had just broken the courtroom wide open. As the judge called for a short recess, murmurs filled the courtroom like a low storm rolling across the ground. Reporters began scribbling frantically. Even seasoned court officers, who had seen dozens of abuse cases, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. But Lily remained still, nestled next to Shadow on the witness chair, oblivious to the chaos her four quiet words had unleashed. "He's the bad one." Simple, direct, terrifyingly clear. The defense team was the first to act. James Elmore, a silver-haired attorney with a record of ruthless cross-examinations, stood stiffly. "We move to have the girl's comments stricken entirely. She's a minor, barely capable of distinguishing fiction from reality." Rachel Torres, the prosecutor, didn't flinch. She wasn't speaking to the jury. She was speaking to the dog. It was spontaneous, unprovoked, unrehearsed. The truth has a way of coming out, whether the defense likes it or not. Judge Holloway held up a hand to silence the back and forth. "Enough. I'll consider the motion during recess." Court is adjourned for 20 minutes. As the gavel hit the sound block, everyone exhaled at once. But Lily didn't notice. She stayed curled into Shadow's side, stroking his fur slowly, methodically. The tension didn't reach her, not anymore. Shadow had a way of absorbing it all. In the hallway, Rachel leaned against the cool wall tiles outside the courtroom, her thoughts racing. The case had seemed impossible when it first crossed her desk. The mother had been too injured to recall much of the attack. The only witness was a toddler who hadn't spoken in weeks. All they had were broken bits of evidence, bruises, and silence, until Shadow entered the picture. Lily had been matched with him during therapy after a recommendation from her child trauma specialist, Dr. Aaron Fields. The K-9 unit typically worked with police officers and veterans, but they had recently started trialing therapy sessions for child abuse victims. Shadow had passed every test, but Rachel never expected him to become the key to the entire case. As the courtroom filled again, so did the tension. Rachel took a deep breath. It was time to try something she hadn't done before. Let a child lead without pressure. Trust her silence. Trust the dog. The judge re-entered and addressed the room. "After review, I will allow the child's statement to remain on record. However, the court reminds the jury to base conclusions on the entirety of the case, not on emotional reaction alone." A quiet but noticeable shift ran through the jury box. They had seen Lily's face, heard the way she spoke. It wasn't an emotional outburst. It was memory. Rachel approached the witness chair gently and crouched. Again. "Hi, Lily. Do you remember me?" Lily didn't look up. Her small fingers continued playing with Shadow's collar. "I'm Rachel. Can I ask you something?" Lily didn't respond. Rachel hesitated. Then she turned to Shadow and spoke to him instead, mimicking Lily's earlier behavior. "Shadow," Rachel said softly, "can you help Lily tell us more? Maybe you remember what happened too." Lily's eyes flicked up. For a second, she almost smiled. "She told you," Lily whispered to Shadow. "You know it now." Rachel lowered her voice to a near whisper, letting the silence of the courtroom stretch around her. "Lily, did something happen the night your mommy got hurt?" Lily nodded. Ben leaned in and whispered something directly into Shadow's ear again. The dog didn't move, except for a small flick of his tail. "What did you tell him, sweetheart?" Rachel asked. Lily's voice trembled. "I said, ... He made the loud sound." "The bad one," Rachel nodded slowly. "Was Shadow there that night?" "No," Lily said, "but he hears me. He listens. He doesn't lie." Gasps rippled again through the gallery. The defense objected, but the judge allowed it. Rachel gently placed a coloring book in front of Lily. "Would you like to draw something for Shadow? Maybe something from that night?" Lily hesitated and picked up a crayon, blue and red. She began sketching. Slowly, without speaking, she drew a room, a table, a bed, then a figure curled under the table, arms hugging knees. Across the room, a bigger figure with red scribbles around its hands. Rachel waited until she was done. "Can you tell me who this is?" she asked, pointing at the larger figure. Lily's hand didn't waver. He yelled. Mommy fell. Table broke. That was all she said. But it was everything they needed. Rachel stood and showed the picture to the judge, then submitted it into evidence. In the gallery, a woman covered her mouth and wept quietly. One of the jurors blinked hard, visibly shaken. James Elmore stood and demanded his cross-examination. "With respect, Your Honor, this is a child barely out of diapers. You can't allow a crayon drawing to convict a man." The judge raised an eyebrow. "And yet here we are. Proceed." Elmore approached slowly. "Lily," he said, trying to sound gentle, "do you know the difference between the truth and a lie?" Lily said nothing. "What if I told you Shadow wasn't there that night? How could he know what happened?" Lily looked at Shadow. Her lip quivered. But then she raised her chin and stared at Elmore with unexpected firmness. "He knows because I told him," she said. "And I never lied to him. Only scary people lie." Rachel's breath caught. Elmore's expression faltered. He tried to press on, but every word landed flat after that. The judge called for another recess. Outside the courtroom, Rachel caught up with Dr. Aaron Fields, who had been observing from the back. "I didn't expect her to say all that," Rachel admitted. "Not so soon." Dr. Fields nodded. "Shadow is her safety. He's her translator. Most kids that age don't have the words for trauma, but they do have memory. What you're seeing in there isn't play. It's protection." "She's stronger than I thought," Rachel whispered. "No," Dr. Fields corrected. "She's just been heard for the first time." Back inside, Lily hugged Shadow tighter as the courtroom cleared for the break. She buried her face in his neck again and whispered the same words over and over. "You remember, don't you?" Shadow licked her cheek gently. And somehow, that was answer enough. The next morning, the courtroom felt different. The kind of shift no one could quite explain, like the air was charged with something unspoken. People entered quietly, without the usual shuffle or whisper. There was a kind of reverence now. Not for the judge, not even for the law, but for the little girl who had spoken 4 words that somehow carried more weight than a dozen witnesses combined. Lily arrived early. Her foster mother walked beside her, and just behind them, Shadow padded in, tail wagging slightly, his eyes alert. The bailiff, who rarely acknowledged witnesses, bent down and gave the dog a soft scratch behind the ears. This time, Lily didn't clutch her stuffed bunny. She didn't need it. Shadow was enough. Rachel Torres, the prosecutor, was all ready, seated at her desk reviewing notes when someone tapped her shoulder. She turned to see Dr. Aaron Fields, Lily's trauma therapist, holding a manila envelope and a tired expression. "I brought something," Dr. Fields said, handing it over. Rachel opened the envelope and pulled out a single handwritten note and a small voice recorder. "She didn't just talk to the dog in court," Dr. Fields explained. "She's been doing it in therapy sessions too. I recorded one of them last week with permission. We didn't think she'd say anything useful. But after yesterday, I think you should hear it." Rachel hit play. The recording was faint at first, filled with static and the quiet rustle of movement. Then Lily's small voice came through. "Shadow, you have to be quiet, okay? He might come back." Silence. "He got mad. Mommy cried. The lamp broke. It was loud. I was under the bed. You weren't there yet, but I wish you were." Rachel stared at the recorder. This wasn't a scripted session. There were no leading questions. Just a child talking to a dog, remembering something she hadn't spoken of before. Dr. Fields placed a hand on Rachel's arm. "We've seen children express trauma in play, in drawings, in dreams. But Lily? She's chosen Shadow. He's the one safe space where her fear unlocks into language." Rachel nodded, heart racing. "I need to get this entered into evidence." "Be careful," Dr. Fields warned. "The defense will argue it's inadmissible. But if you frame it right, it shows her consistent memory, even without adult influence." Inside the courtroom, Lily sat beside Shadow again. She wore a different dress today, one with sunflowers. The coloring book from the day before was still there, open to her crayon drawing of the man yelling beside the broken table. Judge Holloway entered and called court to order. Rachel stood. "Your Honor, the state would like to submit an audio file for review. It's a therapy session recorded, lawfully with permission from Lily's guardian and therapist. It was recorded prior to this trial." The defense immediately objected. "Objection, hearsay, and unverified context," Elmore snapped. "A therapy session is not a deposition. It's biased and unfiltered." The judge raised her hand. "Let me hear it before I rule." Rachel played the recording aloud. Lily's voice filled the courtroom. "Shadow, I'm scared. I don't like loud. He hurt Mommy. I saw it. I was hiding. The table broke. I was quiet. You'd be proud, right? When it ended, no one moved." The judge cleared her throat. "Mr. Elmore, you're free to cross-examine the therapist later. For now, the recording stands." Elmore gritted his teeth, but said nothing. Rachel turned back to Lily. "Lily, do you remember that night?" Lily nodded, but didn't speak. Rachel smiled gently. "Can you tell Shadow what you remember?" Lily turned to the dog, leaned in, and whispered. Then she looked up. "He was shouting," she said, her voice trembling. "Shadow, I was scared. Mommy said run, but I couldn't. I hid. Do you remember where you were hiding?" Rachel asked. Lily reached under the table and pointed. "I was here," she said softly. "Under the table, he didn't see me. But I saw everything." Rachel showed a photo to the jury. The kitchen table, broken in half, snapped near the base. It matched Lily's story exactly. Next, Rachel presented a photo taken the night of the incident. In the background, mostly ignored before, was a child's blanket crumpled under a nearby shelf. Forensic techs had assumed it was moved during the chaos. But now it made sense. "Your Honor," Rachel said, "we are prepared to call a forensic." psychologist to confirm the likelihood of trauma recollection and consistent memory in children Lily's age. Elmore snapped, "You can parade in all the experts you want, but this is still a child with an overactive imagination and a talking dog." Lily looked at him for the first time. "I don't talk to you," she said coldly. "I only talk to Shadow." A few jurors chuckled softly. Even the judge smiled slightly. Shadow, still perfectly still, leaned into Lily as if sensing her tension. His head pressed against her small shoulder. She smiled for the first time in days. Rachel took a risk. She approached the witness chair, knelt down again, and said quietly, "Lily, do you want to tell Shadow what happened when the police came?" Lily nodded. "They took him away. I was under the blanket. I didn't move. The lights were flashing. I saw the red and blue. I saw Mommy on the floor. The courtroom seemed frozen. No one could look away." And Lily added something unexpected. "Shadow would have barked. He would have told me it was okay, but I had to wait." Rachel slowly rose to her feet. "Your Honor, I rest my questioning for today." The judge dismissed Lily from the stand, but before she could step down, Lily hugged Shadow tightly. She didn't let go for a long moment. Then she whispered something so quietly, only the dog could hear. But the courtroom didn't need to know the words. The silence said everything. Later that afternoon, Rachel Torres sat in her office with headphones on, staring at a grainy video clip frozen on her laptop screen. The footage had been submitted weeks ago by a neighbor captured by an outdoor security camera, angled slightly toward the window of Lily's old apartment. Back then, it had seemed unremarkable. Muffled audio, flashes of movement, nothing clearly visible. The file had sat in a folder marked low relevance. But now, after hearing Lily's recollections, Rachel was rethinking everything. She pressed play. The timestamp read 9:47 p.m. Static, muffled sounds. Then a shout. A loud bang. A faint voice, high-pitched and unclear. Rachel paused, replayed it, slowed it down. There it was again. Hide. She bolted upright in her seat. Was that Lily? She enhanced the audio as best she could and listened again. The noise aligned with what Lily had described. The shout, a crash, a sound of something wooden splintering, and then the tiny voice, "Shadow, hide." Shadow hadn't been there that night, but her mind had processed the memory through his presence. She was reliving the trauma, now safe enough, because of the dog, to reveal what she couldn't say before. Rachel immediately called the audio forensic specialist. By the next morning, the courtroom was packed again. Rachel stood confidently. A screen set up beside her. "Your Honor, with permission, we'd like to introduce enhanced audio footage submitted by a neighbor on the night of the incident." The judge nodded. "Proceed." The room dimmed slightly as the screen flickered on. "Please note," Rachel continued, "this footage was recorded without any knowledge of this child's testimony. No one had identified the voice in the background until yesterday." The video played. 9:47 p.m. The crash echoed through the room, startling even those who had heard the story before. Then came the man's voice, yelling, indistinct but angry, followed by something falling. And then, faint but undeniable, "Shadow, hide." Gasps. Rachel paused the footage. Lily has been saying those words repeatedly in therapy sessions, and in this very courtroom. She wasn't coached. She wasn't prompted. This audio proves she was not only present, but mentally engaged during the event. She remembered. She relived it. And now, through Shadow, she's found her voice. Elmore sprang to his feet. "That's speculative. Dogs don't translate English, Miss Torres." Rachel didn't blink. "No, Mr. Elmore, but trust does." The judge overruled the objection. Elmore's confidence visibly cracked. Rachel continued, "We also have Officer Brad Jensen, one of the first responders at the scene, to verify what he heard and saw when he entered the residence. Jensen took the stand, his uniform crisp, eyes sharp. When we arrived, we found the mother unconscious in the kitchen. There was shattered glass, a broken table, and signs of a struggle. The child was discovered minutes later, hiding under a blanket near the hallway closet. Rachel nodded. Was she responsive? She didn't speak. She just clutched a stuffed animal and stared. Were you aware at that time she was the only witness? We were, he replied, and we didn't think she'd ever talk. Rachel turned to the jury. But she has talked. In her own way. And she's consistent. She described the broken table before seeing any photographs. She described the blanket hiding spot before any police told her. She described the crash we now hear on video and said the exact same words then. That she says now. Elmore knew he needed to strike hard. When it was his turn, he approached Jensen with confidence. Officer, did you personally hear the child utter these statements the night of the event? No. So all of this is based on recordings and what she allegedly said to a dog? She said it clearly in court, Jensen replied. The same words from the audio. I'd say that's more than alleged. Elmore clenched his jaw, but moved on. Then came the jury's subtle shift. They weren't looking at Elmore anymore. They were looking at Lily. She sat with her legs tucked beneath her, drawing quietly beside Shadow. Her small hand moved the crayon in slow, circular motions. The picture she was coloring showed a happy son and a house. Safe things, peaceful things, but the court wasn't peaceful. It was charged. Elmore returned to his desk, red-faced and frustrated. Rachel took one final step. She stood, facing the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, we live in a world that often underestimates children. We think they don't remember, that they don't understand. But trauma doesn't care how old you are. And truth doesn't need a loud voice. Sometimes it only needs a whisper, or a child speaking to a dog who makes her feel safe enough to remember. Silence. Even the judge took a breath before proceeding. Court will reconvene at 9 a.m. tomorrow, she said quietly. Jury, you are dismissed for today. As everyone began to gather their things, Shadow stood slowly and stretched. Lily yawned and rested her head against his side. Reporters later described that moment as more powerful than any testimony, because the truth didn't need a spotlight. It was lying quietly beside a little girl in a courtroom full of adults being brave in her own way. And for the first time since this trial had begun, people truly started listening. The next day, the courtroom was quieter than usual. It was as if the air itself had softened in response to the small girl and the silent dog who had taken control of the story without trying. There were no grand speeches, no expert theatrics, just a child and her drawings, and a dog who somehow knew how to carry the weight of her voice. Rachel Torres walked through the courthouse entrance with a mix of anticipation and unease. The case was shifting, but it was still fragile. One misstep could bring the whole thing crashing down. The jury was listening now, but for how long? In her hand, she held an envelope, freshly delivered that morning by Lily's foster mother. Inside were more of Lily's drawings. Rachel had seen dozens from the past few weeks, most vague or symbolic, but one of them stopped her in her tracks. Lily had drawn a kitchen. Broken lines represented shattered glass. The table was split clean in two, and behind it beneath it was a small stick figure with wide eyes, drawn in blue, huddled, alone. And on the far side of the image, towering over everything, was a dark figure shaded in thick, angry strokes of black and red. The figure's hands were scribbled furiously, as if Lily had drawn them with frustration or fear. At the very top of the page, in childlike letters, were two words: He yelled. Rachel knew this needed to be shown in court. Not as art, but as a kind of testimony. When the trial resumed, Lily was already seated quietly with Shadow, who was curled beside her like a sentry. His head lay across his front paws, eyes open but calm. Judge Holloway entered, and court was called to order. Rachel stood. Your Honor, with permission, we'd like to submit another drawing from the witness. It was created yesterday evening, unsolicited. It directly relates to the events being discussed. Elmore stood immediately. Objection. We've already entertained enough crayon sketches. This is bordering on theater. Rachel turned, holding the drawing in her hand. This isn't theater. It's a child's memory expressed in the only way she feels safe. These aren't scribbles. They're recollections. The judge looked at the drawing as the bailiff brought it forward. She studied it for a long moment. The silence stretched across the courtroom like a heavy curtain. I'll allow it, the judge said at last. Proceed. Rachel displayed the drawing on a projector screen. The jury leaned forward almost involuntarily. This was drawn last night. No one prompted her. No one guided her. But what it shows is powerful. She walked closer to the screen and pointed. This is the kitchen. A broken table matches photos from the scene. This here under the table is Lily, hiding, as she told us. And this, Rachel gestured, toward the red and black figure, is who she believes hurt her mother. Then Rachel paused. Lily, can I ask you a few questions about your picture? Lily didn't speak at first. She clutched Shadow's ear, gently. Rachel knelt beside her, careful not to crowd her space. Who's this? She asked, pointing to the large figure. Lily looked at the screen, then at Shadow. That's when he yelled, she whispered. He said Mommy was stupid. He was. Big. Did he see you? Lily shook her head. I was under. Like a mouse. What happened to the table? He kicked it. Mommy fell into it. More gasps from the gallery. A juror covered their mouth. Rachel let the silence settle, then gently asked, How did you feel, Lily? Lily didn't answer. But she leaned into Shadow and whispered, I wanted you there. Rachel stood again. The point is not just what Lily says. It's that her words, drawings, and memories match the physical evidence. The broken table, the shattered glass, the bruises on her mother's arms. This isn't just emotional testimony. This is factual alignment from a child who cannot yet manipulate the narrative. The judge nodded slowly, but Elmore wasn't giving up. When it was his turn, he approached with visible skepticism. Lily, he began, is that just a picture you made up? Lily said nothing. Maybe you dreamed it? Kids have dreams, right? Still no answer. Elmore turned to the judge. Permission to approach the witness. Granted. He knelt beside Lily, trying to appear friendly. Hi, Lily. That's a nice dog you've got. Lily looked away. Is Shadow your best friend? She nodded. Do you tell him stories? Another nod. Sometimes do you tell Shadow pretend stories? Lily blinked, confused. Only real ones. Are you sure? Elmore pressed. What if the bad guy wasn't really bad? What if he tripped? And Mommy fell? Rachel rose quickly. Objection. Leading the witness. Sustained. Elmore backed off, but tried one last jab. You know your drawings can't talk, right? Lily looked up. No, she said quietly, but they remember. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic, but the courtroom shifted again. A pause. A murmur from the gallery. The judge nodded slowly and said, Let the record reflect the child's statement. As Elmore sat down, visibly rattled, Rachel felt something settle inside her. They were getting closer. The jury wasn't just listening, they were connecting. Lily wasn't a passive witness anymore. She was the case's compass. Before court adjourned for the day, Lily reached into her coloring folder again and pulled out another drawing. She didn't say anything. She simply stood up, walked to Rachel, and handed it to her. It was a picture of Shadow. Beside him stood a small figure with a smile. Above them was a heart. And below it, in purple crayon, Shadow is not scared. Rachel looked down at Lily. "No," she whispered. "He isn't, and neither are you." Lily smiled for real for the first time since the trial began. And just like that, the child's proof had done what full testimony often couldn't. It told the truth with crayons, silence, and the steady presence of a dog. The courtroom had changed, not physically, but in mood. Everyone, from the jurors to the bailiff, now looked at Shadow differently. He was no longer just a canine comfort dog. He had become an essential thread in the fragile but growing tapestry of truth. And more importantly, he had helped a traumatized child speak in a way no human could. When court resumed the next morning, there was tension in the air. Not the anxious kind, something closer to hope. People leaned in, whispering to each other. Even Judge Holloway noticed the atmosphere and cleared her throat to regain focus. Rachel Torres stood and asked for something no one expected. "Your Honor," she began, her voice steady, "we'd like to request that Shadow, the certified canine companion, remain beside Lily for the remainder of the trial, and that he be officially acknowledged as part of the communication process." The courtroom buzzed. Elmore was visibly annoyed. "Your Honor," he objected, "this is unprecedented. We're not trying a dog. This is a court of law, not a therapy session." Rachel turned toward the jury. "Your Honor, this is not a matter of sentiment. It's about access to truth. This child has endured trauma. She cannot verbalize everything in a standard manner. Shadow is not a prop. He's her channel to speak." Denying that would silence her again. Judge Holloway leaned back in her chair, thoughtful. "I've read about this," she said, more to herself than anyone else. "There are precedents. In family court, ... none in criminal. But law evolves with need." After a pause, she looked at both attorneys. "Shadow will remain. And for the remainder of this trial, his presence is to be respected and uninterrupted." Lily, clutching Shadow's ear, smiled. It was barely there, but it was real. Rachel continued with the next witness, Dr. Marlene Quinn, a child psychologist who had spent several weeks working with Lily. "Dr. Quinn," Rachel asked, "can you explain the connection between Lily and Shadow in your professional opinion?" Dr. Quinn nodded. "Lily suffers from complex PTSD far more severe than typical for a child her age. But Shadow, in her mind, is not just a dog. He's safety, grounding, and her voice. When she cannot find words, he anchors her. And remarkably, he seems to intuit her emotional state and respond accordingly. Is this scientifically supported?" "Yes," Dr. Quinn said. "The use of therapy animals in trauma cases has gained support in psychological and neurological research. Shadow has been trained for this. But Lily's case? It's unique. He's not just calming her. He's helping translate." Rachel turned toward the jury. "Would it be fair to say that Shadow has allowed a previously silenced witness to testify?" "Yes," Dr. Quinn said firmly. "Without him, I doubt we'd know anything at all." Elmore stood to cross-examine. "So you're saying a dog is doing your job now?" Dr. Quinn didn't blink. "No, I'm saying he's doing what no human could." Elmore backed off. The jury's faces said it all. They weren't buying his mockery. Then came something no one expected. As the psychologist left the stand, Lily quietly tugged at Rachel's sleeve. "I want to tell them now," she whispered. Rachel knelt. "Tell them what, sweetheart?" Lily looked down at Shadow. "I saw him." Rachel's breath caught. "You saw the man who hurt Mommy?" Lily nodded. Rachel hesitated. This wasn't rehearsed. But it was genuine. With the judge's permission, Lily was brought forward again. She sat in the same chair she had occupied before, Shadow's head resting calmly in her lap. Rachel asked gently, "Can you tell us what you saw?" Lily looked at the jury, then at Shadow. She didn't speak for a long time. Then she said, "He came in at night. Mommy was yelling at him to go. I was hiding." Rachel nodded. "What happened next?" "He grabbed Mommy's arm. She screamed. Then the table broke." "Did you see his face?" Lily didn't answer. She reached into her coloring folder and pulled out a small picture. It wasn't like the others. It was sharp, specific. A man with a square jaw, dark eyes, and angry eyebrows. Rachel's heart stopped. She turned it toward the judge. "Your Honor, ... May we submit this?" The judge nodded, stunned. Rachel moved closer. "Lily, do you know this man's name?" Lily nodded. Then she did something no one expected. She turned and pointed at the back of the courtroom, straight at Greg Elmore, the defense attorney. The room erupted. Gasps, shouts. The judge slammed her gavel. "Order, order!" Elmore stood up, outraged. "This is absurd." "She's a child." But Lily wasn't crying. She was calm. Rachel turned, stunned. "Your Honor, the child has identified Mr. Elmore as the man she saw." Judge Holloway's eyes narrowed. "Miss Torres, is there any corroboration for this?" Rachel hesitated. "We didn't expect this." But ... Lily has never once pointed at anyone in this courtroom until now. Elmore was shouting, "I wasn't." Even there. This is insane. But the seed had been planted. The jurors were shaken. Rachel approached the bench. "Your Honor, we'd like to request a temporary recess to verify this claim." Judge Holloway looked between Lily, Shadow, and Elmore, whose face had gone pale. "Court is in recess for 24 hours. The prosecution will gather all supporting evidence related to this new claim." The gavel slammed. The room buzzed again, but this time with chaos. Outside the courtroom, Rachel crouched to Lily's level. "Sweetheart, are you sure?" Lily nodded. "He wore a red tie, like today, but last time." His voice was louder. Rachel stood, dazed. Shadow nudged her hand, as if to say, "She's telling the truth." The courthouse was in uproar. By the time news of Lily's shocking identification of Elmore as the man who hurt her mother reached the press, headlines were already spinning. Defense attorney accused by toddler witness. Read one. Another. Read. Police dog and child. Break open case with shocking allegation. Inside the DA's office, Rachel Torres paced the floor, her phone pressed tightly to her ear. "I don't care how late it is," she snapped. "I need a full background check on Gregory Elmore. Bank records, call logs, travel receipts, everything." Now, Detective Alan Brooks stood nearby, arms crossed, Shadow lying calmly at his feet. "She's not wrong," he said quietly, nodding toward the still courtroom sketch Lily had drawn. "The likeness is too close to be coincidence." Rachel turned, her eyes fierce. "And the tie." She said he wore a red tie. Elmore wore one. That night in court, and she remembered. Brooks nodded. "But we need more than drawings and a traumatized girl's memory." Rachel rubbed her forehead. "Then let's find it." Meanwhile, in the recess granted by the court, defense attorney Gregory Elmore had retreated to his private office with his junior associate. He was seething, his composure slipping. "She's 3, he barked. "How is this even happening?" "A kid and a mutt? That's all they have?" The associate shifted uncomfortably. "They've requested a search warrant, sir. For your home and car." Elmore went silent. Then, for the first time in years, he looked nervous. The next morning, before court resumed, Rachel got the call she had been waiting for. "Got something," said Brooks. Security camera footage bank, ATM, downtown night of the assault. It's grainy, but there's a man in a red tie. Right height. Right build. Rachel held her breath. Can we confirm it's Elmore? Not yet, but we're getting closer. He lied about his whereabouts that night. Claimed he was home. Rachel's mind raced. Can we prove otherwise? Brooks's voice grew grim. His phone pinged near the victim's apartment. 10 minutes before the 911 call. Rachel's knees nearly buckled. We've got him. Back in the courtroom, Judge Holloway's eyes swept the room. The tension was tangible. Rachel stood, her voice calm and measured. Your Honor, the prosecution requests the court to admit new evidence gathered during recess. It's urgent and material to the identity of the true assailant. Elmore stood too, but this time his voice had a quiver. This is out of procedure. You're letting a child dictate the trial. Judge Holloway eyed him coldly. You'll have your chance to respond, Mr. Elmore. Sit down. Rachel presented the phone data first, then the ATM footage. And one more thing, she said, holding up a printout. A transfer large sum deposited into Elmore's account from a shell company linked to Martin Gates. Everyone in the courtroom gasped. Martin Gates, the victim's ex-boyfriend, long believed to be the original suspect before charges were dropped due to lack of evidence. Rachel continued. We believe Elmore was hired by Gates to scare or silence the victim after she threatened to testify against him in another case. Elmore took things further. Elmore jumped up. Lies, all of it. Rachel turned to him. Then why did you lie about where you were that night? Elmore froze. Judge Holloway banged her gavel. Order. Rachel looked at the judge. We now request Mr. Elmore be taken into custody pending further investigation. Elmore's face was pale, his confidence gone. He stammered, You're taking the word of a child? No, Rachel replied. We're taking the truth she unlocked. At that moment, Lily, sitting quietly beside Shadow, did something. Again, she stood up, walked toward the jury box unprompted, and said softly, That's him. I saw his eyes. They were angry. Shadow followed behind her, tail low, as if shielding her from the man she feared most. The courtroom was silent. Judge Holloway finally spoke. Mr. Elmore, you are to be remanded into custody while the court reconvenes and formal charges are considered. Bail is denied. 2 deputies approached Elmore. He didn't resist. He looked stunned, as if he'd never imagined the courtroom he dominated would turn on him. As he was escorted away, he locked eyes with Lily. But this time, she didn't look away. The courtroom exhaled all at once. Rachel slowly walked over to Lily and knelt down. You were so brave. Lily reached out and hugged her. Shadow helped. Rachel smiled, tears in her eyes. I know he did. Outside the courthouse, a sea of reporters had gathered, pushing microphones forward as Rachel stepped into the sun. Is it true? A 3-year-old just cracked the case? Was the K-9 really that important? Did you know it was Elmore all along? Rachel raised her hand for silence. We came here seeking justice. We didn't expect it to come from a child or a dog. But justice doesn't care how it finds the truth, just that it does. Inside the building, Lily sat with Shadow curled at her feet. For the first time in months, she played with her crayons, not to tell the truth, but just to draw. Free, whole, safe. The courtroom sat still long after Gregory Elmore was led away in handcuffs. Every person in the room, judge, jury, lawyers, and spectators, was visibly shaken. Not because a respected defense attorney had been exposed, but because it took a 3-year-old girl and a loyal police dog to uncover what others had overlooked. Detective Brooks stood by the courtroom window, watching the rain start to fall. Beside him, Shadow rested quietly, ears twitching every time someone shuffled or whispered behind them. Brooks bent down and whispered, "Good work, partner. Couldn't have done this without you." Shadow's tail wagged once, as if he understood the weight of what they had accomplished. Across the room, Lily sat between her foster guardian and Rachel Torres. She clutched Shadow's badge, a small plastic version Brooks had given her earlier, and looked up at Rachel. "Is the bad man gone?" she asked. Rachel smiled gently. "Yes, sweetheart. He won't hurt anyone ever again." Lily gave a small nod, then turned back to her coloring book. This time, her drawings were bright again: sunshine, trees, a smiling dog, and a little girl holding his leash. Outside, the press conference had already begun. Cameras rolled as Rachel stood at the podium, flanked by Detective Brooks and Police Chief Mendel. The crowd quieted as she began. "We are proud to announce that thanks to brave witness testimony and thorough investigation, the individual responsible for the assault on Melanie Grace has been identified and is now in custody. This case would not have been solved without the incredible work of our K-9 unit, specifically Officer Shadow, and without the courage of one remarkable child." She paused, letting the impact sink in. "Let this be a reminder. No voice is too small, no witness too young, and no badge, fur-covered or not, too insignificant to bring about justice." Reporters erupted with questions. Will Elmore be disbarred? Is Lily going to testify further? Will there be charges against Martin Gates as well? Rachel raised her hand to quiet them. "Further investigation is underway. We are following leads connected to Martin Gates and are prepared to prosecute fully. As for Lily, she has done her part. She deserves peace now." Later that evening, the judge signed an emergency order placing Lily into a safe and stable home Rachel had arranged for Melanie Grace's sister, Ava, to become her guardian while Melanie continued her long recovery. The hospital had reported significant improvement in Melanie's condition. She was beginning to speak again, and when she heard what her daughter had done, her eyes filled with tears. "She saved me," Melanie whispered. "My baby saved me." The following week, the courtroom where it all happened hosted a small private ceremony. Shadow, in his formal K-9 vest, stood proudly as Judge Holloway approached Lily and knelt beside her. "Lily," she said, "in all my years on the bench, I've never seen anyone as brave as you. You told the truth when no one else could. You helped catch someone very dangerous. And because of that, I'd like to give you something very special." She held out a small certificate that read, "Honorary Junior Justice Advocate, Lily Grace." The room applauded. Lily beamed. She wasn't shy anymore. Then Brooks stepped forward. "I think someone else has something for you, too." He gave a slight whistle, and Shadow trotted over carrying a small stuffed dog in his mouth. He dropped it gently into Lily's lap. "It's for you," Brooks said, "from Shadow." Lily giggled and hugged the toy close. "Thank you, Shadow." The dog sat beside her, tail wagging. In that moment, everyone in the room knew something important had happened, something bigger than a court victory. It was about truth, healing, and the unlikely team of a child and a dog who reminded everyone what justice truly meant. In the weeks that followed, Lily became a quiet symbol of strength. Media outlets told her story with compassion. Schools shared it as a lesson in listening to all voices, especially those often ignored. Rachel received letters from parents, teachers, and even former victims of abuse. Many wrote that Lily's courage gave them strength to speak up for the first time. Others simply said, "Thank you for believing her." Meanwhile, Shadow returned to active duty with a newfound celebrity status. Children across the city wrote him letters and sent dog treats. One letter read, Dear Officer Shadow, you are the best dog in the world. Thank you for protecting Lily. Brooks hung the note in his office. As for Rachel, she took on a new case shortly after, but this time with a renewed fire. She'd seen firsthand how the system could fail the voiceless and vowed never to let that happen again. On a warm afternoon weeks later, Lily stood hand in hand with her mother outside the courthouse. Melanie, now able to walk short distances again, smiled down at her daughter. You are my little hero, she whispered. Lily looked up. And Shadow too. Melanie nodded. Always. The courthouse bell chimed the hour as a breeze passed by, carrying with it the sound of children laughing in the nearby park. Peace was returning. Slowly, gently, and in the middle of it all, a girl who once wouldn't speak had changed an entire courtroom. With just a few brave words.